Welcome to Business Brains and the Bottom Line. My name is Paul Delegro, your host today, and my guest is a gentleman by the name of Nick Whittington. He is a cybersecurity engineer. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Cool. So obviously, cybersecurity is it's all you hear about on the news. It's a big thing. Every company's worried about their security. But before we get into that, I wanted to get into your background a little bit because I think it's interesting. You have not always been in cybersecurity. Am I correct on that one?
You are, absolutely.
So if I think I remember you telling me previously you were a teacher at one point and then a musician. So how did you make the jump? First off, tell me a little bit about your music career, but how did you make the jump from that to cybersecurity? Because that's kind of a jump. That's not like an easy transition, right?
True. Just really quickly, I was in high school and I was destined to be an aeronautical engineer. That was my goal. I loved the idea of working on planes and working on spaceships and space station stuff. I wanted to do all that stuff. But then at some point I was like, I don't think I'd be okay if this was like a cubicle kind of job. I didn't know how I would handle that. Like that wasn't my personality for sure at the time, and still really isn't. And it kind of just it hit me hard, and then right at the same time, I was starting up with playing guitar, and because guitar picks up chicks in high school, so you do the thing that you love, and you also try to attract things that you love with the things that you love, and I was like, I can do this. This is great. I love music, and I'm sure I can find a way to make this work, and I did. I went to school for music and did jazz studies at North Texas, and and then as you do, you pick up a gig somewhere, and then you drop off from the schoolwork side, and you go in to start gigging and just hitting all over the United States with different bands. I picked up multiple instruments while I was doing that because it just kind of financially it makes way more sense to be well versed in the music scene. So started doing that, working on doing studio stuff and live music. Eventually worked my way into music production, and creating music for others along with my own stuff. But then it was going well and been fairly lucrative. And I was like, well, I've got this time during the day because I'm always working at night. Maybe I could do something with all this music knowledge. And so I got into teaching private lessons, and that inspired me eventually to finish up and then go and get into teaching at a private school. Teaching as a music instructor there. From all of that, I love music, and music is definitely a huge part of my life. Really, the vast majority of my adult life was as a professional musician. But there was still a part of me that's the technical side that wasn't getting that itch scratched.
Yeah.
And at some point, I was just kind of like, why am I not? I mean, cybersecurity had at this point become a very avid hobby, like hacking, especially learning how to hack, learning how to make things do what they're not supposed to do. I essentially define as hacking is finding ways around the initial problem. And so getting into cybersecurity was kind of I'm at my age and leveled up as far as I can with music without really going the extra mile and doing more. And I'm comfortable with what I'm doing, but what if I push myself? What if I get into a whole nother field, completely different field? But with this drive, and I always made it a thing where I never wanted to do a job that I hated. And that's still my mantra to this day, where I'm every job that I've done, every gig that I've done, every job that I've done has been something that I've at some point enjoyed. And you can probably agree that there's going to be parts of your job that even though you may love it, there's going to be parts that are just they're monotonous or frustrating here and there, but that's not doing a job that you absolutely hate because you just feel like you need to. This is I went from one dream job to another, to be honest. And so it's funny. All my music guys are like, are you still doing music? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'm like, I'll see you tonight.
The best of both worlds, the way I look at it, right? You get the outlet of the music, your creative side. And then, you get your technical side that, like you said, scratches that itch.
for sure. And
Cool.
I don't think I'll look back. I mean, I don't get me wrong. It's music is very much like it's intrinsic to everything that I do, and I'm a hardcore music nerd. You have any music theory questions like that go into super detailed stuff, I probably can work with you on that and help you get the answers that
Yeah.
you're looking for. But like at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like I
Well,
take that
you
same
know, I
product.
think in life today, um, everything doesn't have to be all or nothing anymore. I think like, years ago when my father was growing up, they had to pick something and do it.
Yep.
Right. There was no now people are doing several different things in life, different
Yeah,
hobbies, different jobs. I think it's great,
for sure. Yeah,
you know.
absolutely.
So, well, I like to learn about people and their stories, and that's an interesting one. I thought, making that transition from music, or not just not a transition, really, just adding another talent to your repertoire, because it's not like you moved out of the music industry, you're still in it, but you're doing other things as well.
For sure. Definitely less time spent in that field just because, like all my free time at this point is just I'm constantly learning new vulnerabilities and
Sure.
all trying to stay as current as possible. But yeah, so
Yeah. Well, when you and I were talking about, being a guest on the show, we kind of wanted to talk about again, cybersecurity is such a wide umbrella, right? There's so many aspects of it. I mean, we could never have enough time to do it. But what we wanted to talk about today was understanding a hacker from a hacker's point of view, like why they do what they do, how they do what they do. And I think in doing that, it gets us to be better at our jobs, if I understand this
yep,
correctly.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Talk about that a little bit, like, the things you're seeing out there, and why you try to put yourselves in the hacker's shoes to try to determine, what they're going to do next.
Sure. So I think we see it a lot nowadays where every new hack that happens, a big, huge hacks that happen, when you come down to like you actually find out the roots, like or at least the initial attack surface, or like where they get like access initially, how they get into the network, and they start wreaking havoc. Um, it, I mean, these are big companies that have security budgets. They have, lots of platforms that they're using and layered security in place, and yet they
Right.
still somehow get hacked, and it makes you wonder like what's going on. And like I'm noticing, and I've always noticed this, like from the get go, especially whenever it started being more and more publicized, is how big these hacks are. That it's almost always because of either human error, like so there's like
That's the
social
biggest one, right?
engineering.
I mean, not to dog on people, but that's the biggest threat vector is humans, correct?
Absolutely, I mean you can hands down say that like it's social engineering. So
Yep.
like manipulating someone to think that you're somebody that you're not, or gaining access to something that you're really not supposed to, but by tricking someone basically into thinking that
Right.
you have credentials or you have right of access. Um, that social engineering aspect really plays heavily in that initial foothold, like inside of a network, because sometimes it's just getting credentials because someone left something out online and that got hacked, and then now the credentials are readily available. But then sometimes it's just simply, um, you know, calling in and saying, "Hey, I'm with some ISP and I'm trying to get into your server. Can you read off this number for me?"
Yeah.
And it's most people they got a million other things to do in their day. They're not really going to be bothered by this. They're like, sure, yeah, I'll get it to you. Give me 1 sec. It's just one thing in the chain of things that they got to do that day. But I guess what I'm getting at really is that when you understand how a hacker works, when you understand really what a hacker's doing and what their motivation is, you start finding that they may not follow the same path that you've set up traps for, that you've like you may have set up all these different security systems in place to prevent all these different vectors from being viable attack sources or viable attack platform, viable attack surfaces. But yet at the same time, like it's all about like looking around. That's literally what a hacker does. Like a hacker, let me break that down because this is how I perceive it, and I'm sure there's plenty of other hackers that may see it in different perspectives, because that's what we do. We're always
Yeah.
looking at different ways of doing things. But hacking is, in my perspective, is just making something do something it's not supposed to, uh, and that could be through some kind of manipulation of some sort. But I mean, you can imagine. if someone says like, well, here's the path that all the bad guys are going to take, and we've secured all these different little spots along our perimeter, most hackers are looking at that and going, yeah, I see that you've got them like secured, but let me see if I can find another spot, because that's what we do. Like
Right.
hackers, we're always looking for a challenge. We're always looking for a way around. We're always looking for a back door. We're always looking for, and sometimes it's even like, how can I walk through the front door with like, with like, this, how can I really make a show with what I'm doing sometimes? Because that's kind of also another thing about, if you start to get to know some of these big name hackers of history, there's a little bit of like, I don't know if the word's machado, but like, it's like, there's
Yeah, no,
definitely,
I think that's a good word. You can probably use that.
yeah, I mean, like there's definitely some like some showboating that goes on in the world as well. But when you really start to break down who a hacker is and what their motivation is, and not all the time is it financial. Sometimes it's like you can be like a hacktivist. Like, I mean, there's plenty of hackers out there that straight up that's their whole goal is to bring down certain companies that they don't like or certain entities that they don't like.
Right.
Politically, like governments, like that's just what they do. But if you look at it from the vast majority of the ones that we're running into constantly, it's a financial gain situation, mixed with a little bit of like, of bragging rights. So understanding it that from that perspective, there's a lot more depth that I think a lot of companies uh, could take advantage of and securing their networks and securing their perimeter and their infrastructure, because they're not always seeing it from that perspective. They're just thinking that they're going to follow a standard path, which that is literally like against the typical hacker mentality, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know from my perspective, um, I'd say security is front and center for pretty much everybody right now. But the problem is budgets, right?
Yep.
And that's the biggest hurdle is, a lot of companies haven't allotted enough for security, and it's not a problem until it is a problem, right? And then everyone's scrambling,
Exactly.
right?
Oh yeah.
So what are some of the typical ways companies either get breached or hacked or phished or whatever? Explain some of those, because I think again, like we talked about earlier, there's several ways that a hacker can gain entrance into a company,
Sure.
right?
So there's actually so you already hit one, which is phishing.
Right.
That tends to be a pretty big one. Phishing is also broken into a bunch of different categories. We have something called vishing, which is like that's the text message thing, like we see all the time,
Yep.
where it's like getting you trying to click on a link with text messages. Um, and smishing, which is like SMS as well. Like, again, so you get phone calls, it's vishing. Smishing is SMS, like, so texting. Um, but it all still fits within that mindset of like they're phishing for either credentials or for you to click on something that's going to install something like malware or some sort of like rootkit onto your network or onto your device. There's, I mean, that's probably like I would say a primary vector, just because the thing that it's very low cost of time and effort and finances, like a financial side of it too, to run a campaign, to run a phishing campaign. I mean, I have multiple tools that I can use at my disposal that that are open source that you can find online. You just build it how you want to, and like set some configurations, and boom, and just start sending out thousands and thousands and thousands of emails at once. It's totally a accessible hack. It doesn't require a ton of knowledge in the field. It really, more than anything, it's like that's why you get so many of them, because there's so many novices actually that are trying it and doing it without really knowing how to hone it. But then that honed like phishing attack is really more like spear phishing. So you'll get the guys that they know, they've done the research, they've spent time and energy really learning their target, learning like if they're looking for a CEO, or they're looking for a financial officer, or they're looking for someone that has access to the funds, like, or maybe they're just a means to an end. Maybe like it's a third party, or it's a within a larger company's what's the word for that, within their supply chain. So if they can find a way to escalate through a supply chain, that's definitely a viable option. It Keep in mind too that there's a certain level of work that's going to be involved in it. So just like any other job in the world, you got to put in perspective that hackers are going to spend just about as much money or time and energy that they want to, thinking that they're going to get a reward in return.
Yeah.
So phishing, I mean, you can do that in your sleep. Like that's
Yeah.
why you get so many phishing attacks all the time, because it's just something that just you can run automatically. But now spear phishing, and especially when it comes to physical security, this is one of my favorites. Like, I'm actually a really big fan of like the physical hacking side of things, and social engineering and all that. But people don't even realize what they're giving away online all the time. That's another, to me, a big vector in hacking. Just simply gaining information on your target and knowing how to social engineer the situation. For instance, one of my favorites that I see quite often, used even like in on the red team side, when people are testing their networks with either a third party or maybe internally. One of the common tactics you'll see is someone either copying credentials for like physical access to a building, so that they can look more legitimate in a physical location. They can walk in,
Yeah.
talk the talk, walk the walk.
Yeah.
And
I've
look like
often said sometimes the obvious is the unobvious, right?
that's
Right. Like you're saying, having guts, like the old days, walking out of an appliance store with a TV over your shoulder,
exactly.
right out to the figure. No one's going to be that stupid to do that, but they did. They did it. That's,
they do.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately, I mean, like when I first started learning, especially about the social engineering aspects and the physical attacks, where it's like on-site attacks. All the speakers and all the people that spoke into it and had like their perspective all said the same stuff. It's like you just kind of act like you belong. Like, it's so easy. No one's really looking for, no one, especially the larger the company, the less people know each other, and which is part of the fix a lot of times, is to really get to know your sector, get to know who should be in that office at that time. But I mean, one of my favorite things is people that post company photos, or they're all hanging out doing a company like get together. And what do you usually see? Like, because they're doing it at work, you usually see their ID badge. That ID badge, now I have a visual of that ID badge. I know what it looks like now. I know exactly what I should make to make it look legitimate, so I can make a copy of that ID, and then I can run. I have a somewhere around here. I've got a bag that basically has a scanner that I can get about 3 to 6 feet away from someone, and I can like steal their card like that.
Wow.
These are really easy. Yeah, and you would never know. No one would ever, like, you wouldn't be the wiser. But if I know that company, if I've done enough like open source intelligence searching, or what's called OSINT, if I've done enough researching, I could probably find out, hey, that guy looks like the security officer. That guy looks like he's the facilities director. He probably has access to a lot of rooms. And so I'll just hang out around him. He's going to sit down and have a smoke outside, the front door, and I'll just sit right next to him and be on my phone. But my bag is actively scanning, and now I have his credentials. I can copy that to a little card that looks just like their card. I can have a printout that I can just tape on, and no one's going to really pay attention to. And then I just act like I'm supposed to be there, and just like boop, walk in, act like I'm either that, or I can act like I'm a contractor, or I can do whatever. So
sure.
So those kind of attacks, the physical attacks, are mostly because we're not paying attention, and we don't really have time to. A lot of times, that's really what it is.
Yeah, it's hard to have your guard up all the time.
Of course, because I mean that's where, so in cybersecurity, we think of things from the perspective of, is like, we want to maintain a certain level of accountability, and then a certain level of accessibility, but we also need to have security. And we need something that's going to prevent bad things from happening. But out of those three, you're going to start giving or taking out of one or the other to fill the rest. And so that's the downside, is like the more secure, the less accessible, and then the more accessible, the less secure, most likely. And so I've seen it in workplaces that I've been at, whether it be like a school, or like even I played. Years and years and years ago, I played in DC, doing like this show out on the lawn, like out on, not the lawn, the mall, the center mall through the middle of DC, where you've got Lincoln Memorial and all that. And security was as strict, as kind of like strict as you would think it would be, but there was definitely some spots where I'm like, and now we're just sneaking in the pizza guy in the back, because he's a pizza guy. Who's going to stop him? he's just delivering pizza. But that's the kind of guy. Like I want to. If I'm a hacker, I'm thinking I'm that guy. That's exactly who I'm going to be because I can just walk right in. No one's gonna question the guy that's got a pizza hat on and a pizza in his hand. No one's
Yeah.
going to bother with that guy. So like physical is like one of my favorite parts. But I will say this: it's not only is it a little harder because you got to think about physical location and especially after COVID, not a lot of people are always doing things in an office building. I mean, plenty of us are, but that's not always the primary attack vector. It's so much easier. I mean, I can hop on my computer right now and start working, and I can probably get into like, well, I mean, I'm not saying I would, but if I was a bad guy, I could get into like all kinds of different trouble that way just from my computer at home and running through a bunch of different proxies or whatever, and they'd never know where I was at. Um, so it's kind of it's the question is like that back to that investment side. Is it worth my time, money, effort to go and try to physically gain access to a server, like and on site with this location or whatever with this company entity whatever, or do I just do this from the comfort of my own home, with enough time and resources and energy? Is there a way in digitally? Is there a way in through the network? Which is another common way of doing things. It's just ports that are left open, things that are like old services that they haven't touched in years, but no one bothered to fix it because that was Jim's job back in the day when Jim worked here. That's so those are the kind of things that as a hacker I'm looking for. That I'm looking for holes that are forgotten, and then how can I like punch that hole and make a wide enough hole that I can start dropping in my own programs. I can start dropping in my own resources to gain a foothold and to spread across and move laterally in that network. So digital is really that's the primary like attack vector. As much as you should worry about physical, I would say probably 10 times more, 20 times, 100 times, depending on who you ask. You should be more concerned about your digital side, like, and more concerned about your digital perimeter and what you're guarding against that way, because we see it every day. We see so many new vulnerabilities that come up, and that's actually when we see those pop up a lot. Like you see this new vulnerability, this new like remote code execution, this new like authentication bypass, like all these things come up because there's other hackers that are doing it the right way. There's other hackers that are out there testing these systems, realizing there's a problem, realizing that there's an issue, and through certain things like a bug bounty program, they're able to find those issues and let the company know ahead of time, so that the company has about, I think that the average right now is like 3 months to actually patch it and get it figured out before they release that information on public, because that's the accountability right there. Is once you say, okay, look, 3 months is up, I'm going to tell the public now that there's a vulnerability. If you guys don't patch it, that's on you. Like you guys had plenty of opportunity to patch it.
Well, what I've noticed, with a lot of our customers, that they're doing much more training, right? And they're trying to make the process more inclusive and not outing people, right? Not shaming people that make mistakes, trying to make it part of the learning process. And from a technology standpoint, there's a lot more stuff going, like multi-factor authentication. There's a lot of things that are, trying to prevent, getting breached and hacked. Is it helping? What do you think? I mean,
I do. I absolutely believe that it's helping. I've seen like plenty of situations where, and this is from talking to other guys in the field. I personally, we haven't seen it happen with Prescriptive, but like you'll run into security firms, you'll run into mega like corporations and all these guys that they'll get a notification on their phone that says like, hey, you're trying to be accessed or whatever, and then they're like, wait, what? No, I'm not. I'm not trying to like access my material right now. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. What the heck? And it's because of multi-factor authentication that is being prevented. Now, like just like any other situation, hackers think outside the box. Hackers intentionally are creative. Like they try to see, well, what can I do? What if there's multi-factor authentication? And one of my favorites, which is not my favorite, but it's my favorite because it's how simple it is. It's MFA spamming. It's you just keep hitting them, like especially if there's no like settings to set it otherwise. You just keep hitting the same person with that MFA like questionnaire, like hey, this is trying to be accessed. Hey, this is wanting to be accessed. And that same person keeps getting that notification. Are you trying to access? Till eventually at 3 o'clock in the morning, the 8th time in a row, they're just like, fine, here, and they just hit the button, out of just being worn down,
Right.
they'll let the person in eventually. So even with multi-factor authentication, there's still a level of accountability and a level of awareness that the end user, that the employee needs to keep in mind, that they shouldn't just hit OK just because it's just annoying. Obviously, I mean that should feel annoying. It
Right.
should feel obvious, but yet at the same time, when it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to get sleep, it's like that feels like it's just
Yeah, and
overwhelming.
that's the again that they keep trying, and that one time you let your guard down, it's over.
And it's happened to the best of us. Like there's CISOs out there, like CISOs. There's like technology officers. There's even like hackers that I know that have been hit because they like let their guard down. And like you said earlier, it's at some point you can't literally just be on guard all the time. Like that's like almost like that. That's like indicating you have trauma.
Yeah.
So like if that's where we have to live in the
Yeah,
trauma
as I
state
say,
constantly.
it would be depressing if you're thinking about security all the time. Every
Exactly.
single email, every single text you received, it wear me down.
But there's still something to that because you have to think about like so I'm in my late 30s and I remember a day whenever I was younger where my mom would just let me just kind of run the roads with my one of my best friends. We would ride bikes until it got dark and then she'd tell us, hey, you make sure you're back before it gets too dark. Okay. And we would do that. And I would venture to say that most neighborhoods out there now, and the neighborhood I lived in was not like the nicest neighborhood. I didn't really, I grew up in a super nice suburban neighborhood, but still, it's like back then, even like in the late '80s, early '90s, it was still kind of okay to do that, and you can get away with it. But then again, that same neighborhood now, I mean, parents would probably think twice before just let their kids run off and do whatever they want to. There's a
Yeah.
change in culture that happens because of, and I hate to say it because I mean, I would like to see culture, go for a more positive direction, but we have to be real and realize that those the things that we used to be able to do are not able to be done anymore the same way. We can't treat our children's safety and security out in the environment, as lackadaisical as we could, as we could back then. We can't do it now the same way. And the same thing goes with our security awareness when it comes to handling emails and handling text messages and handling documents from another company. We have to have that extra level of scrutiny, which sucks. I definitely don't like it. I think it's frustrating because it is an extra level of things where I'm like, I don't want to have to think about this. And they're like, as a prescriptive, we obviously offer tons of platforms and security options that help take away some of that, like, it being all on me to make sure I make the right decision
Yeah.
or else. There's lots of, checks and balances and layered security in place that we
Yeah.
can apply. But it's not like, it's just not the good old days, so to say, that we would just trust and believe in anything and everything that got sent to us,
Yeah.
because it's that prevalent. And I do feel that as security as it becomes more and more important in the right people's minds, we will see insecurity get stronger and stronger in a way where a lot of the things that are affecting us now won't affect us anymore the
Yeah.
same way. But because hackers are hackers, there's going to be new and
Yeah. I was going
interesting
to say
ways around.
they're evolving too, just like our technology are evolving, they're evolving too.
You've heard the
You
cat
touch on.
mouse game concept, like that's the idea. It's like it's the cops and robbers. Like
Yep.
anytime that a hacker comes up with something, especially like a 0 day that no one's seen before in the wild, but all of a sudden now they're using it to get in and out of things, uh, then there's the other side of the world, the other side of the cybersecurity community that's working vigorously to try to patch it and fix it. We all went through the whole like the Log4j like fiasco where it was integrated into everything that a lot of these businesses and entities were using on a day-to-day basis. And now you're asking at like you're right at the end of the year, hey, now you need to spend a lot of extra time like fixing and patching this thing that was totally okay. All of a sudden now it's or totally okay, but now all of a sudden it's a dangerous vector that now can be easily exploited. And it's not like it didn't have very much time to be patched because it was already out in the wild that there was a way to get out there and there's a way to do these like hacks very easily and very quickly. And that's really where the volatility of certain cyber attacks happen is when it's easy to do and it's, because 95% of hackers out there that are like quote unquote hackers are really what we call script kiddies. They're just taking code from something that they find online and just copy and pasting it over. If they do any little manipulation, well, that's super lead of them, but that's not
Yeah.
very typical. A lot of times it's because someone's done it before, and they've just copy and pasted it or sold it even. Like people have done that before. So
Yeah, I'm gonna take a guess on this one. I would think there's very few geniuses out there doing hacking. They're probably a little bit creative, but they're mostly copycats, right?
yeah, and the ones that really paved the way for both in the Black Hat era, like or the Black Hat regions, like the bad guys, like the ones that are doing all
Mhm.
the stuff for their own profit and for their own gain and for for the lulz sometimes, like as so to say, those guys. There's plenty of those guys out there that are being super creative and coming up with really interesting and innovative ways to do bad things.
Yeah.
But then again, there's just as many of those guys on the good side that are trying to do those bad things for good. They're trying to break those, which is where my passion is. I like the idea of breaking something, not like where it's unfixable, but breaking it and understanding like how did that even work? Like that's where engineering, like in my head, why it's like it's funny being a creative, but yet being an engineer, being like able to look at it from that perspective of like how do I break this apart? Cool, that's how it all works. Now let's put it back together, but maybe let's see if we do something different. Let's attach this wire to that wire and see what happens. That's what these guys do day to day in coding, and I mean it's less and less a physical thing anymore. Everything's all in like in the cloud code, and it's so
Yeah.
easy to manipulate a lot of these.
And they can hide behind a computer, which is nice for them, right? You know.
Exactly. It used to be that I would say that's what's so funny too is that not that it was super easy, but I mean, like, when you hide behind proxies, like those proxies are usually like those proxy servers are owned by somebody. And so with the right amount of government interference, like in government involvement, they can probe that. They can, trace it back far enough. But I mean, there's kind of this, long-standing joke in the hacker forums of like, good luck trying to find me. I'm behind like 12 proxies. Like, so it's really like how much investment is that guy going to really take to try to get to me? If I'm already doing this, from the comfort of my home, wherever the heck I'm at,
Right.
bouncing through however many, different proxies all over the world that I want to. Well, there's limits because, sometimes at some point, like it gets really slow. But it's just the idea that it is that easy. Or at least I'm making it sound easy. With enough practice, it's not something that makes it, it's not a very difficult thing, and it's a lot easier than walking into a company and trying to act like an ISP service provider technician or whatever.
Right. Yep.
So yeah, there's a lot of that.
Yep. Cool. You touched on something earlier. One of the things that I think you mentioned was layering, right? So I always caution customers, if a company says their solution does everything and that's all you'd need, they're lying.
Right. I do.
So we always recommend a layered approach, right? Because there's multiple solutions that if one misses it, another would catch it. Not going to catch everything, but you have a better chance is if you layer different solutions in place.
A good example of that would be, so some companies, and I'm not going to say any names, but like there are certain companies that they will say like, hey, well, we've got your firewalls covered, or your routers covered, we've got your CASB, like your SASE, we've got all these different like things that we can offer as one big package. And don't get me wrong, those are all separate packages within the same platform. It's under the same umbrella, but yeah,
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like it's still kind of you're relying on one company's like single offering to kind of do it all. And I'm not saying that's bad all the time, but it definitely helps to have, like, say for instance, having an endpoint protection solution that does some of the internal firewall stuff for you, like on the individual device
Right.
side, while still having
A firewall.
a firewall that's doing
Right.
the perimeter side and
Yeah.
virtual ends like like internally, like that's ideal. But it's surprisingly, and kind of what you touched on at the very beginning was there's almost always what I find that becomes a security hole and eventually becomes a threat is the lack of funding.
Yeah.
I hate to say it because I mean we all would like to save a buck for sure. I mean like that's just I mean, we live in a capitalist, like society, and that's how it works. Like, save money, don't spend as much, but get as much as you can out of it. And in that regard, it's like we run into a lot of solutions that they start getting a little bit more expensive than we'd like them to be.
Yeah.
And if it was up to me as a security guy, I'm like, yes, spend all the money on the security because that's literally protecting everything that you own. That's like all of your like your IP. Like that's like
Yeah.
not like it's literally anything that you own that's like, okay, I'll put it this way. As a hacker, if I can leak information that you deem private, that you deem something that gives you an edge, maybe as a company, that can sink you. That can sink you as a company.
Oh, yeah.
And I've seen it before. I've seen it happen a lot of times. It actually happens. It's funny. I'm a gamer. I like to play a lot of different types of games, and so you always hear about like, oh, this game leaked, or and it's because some hacker got in, found out like something about the new games that are coming out, and was able to get images. Sometimes even get source code from the actual game, and leak it online. Now, doesn't necessarily disrupt the game community because people are still going to go and buy that game. Like they're not a lot of times going.
Right.
It's not going to usually affect the gamer community unless it's something that's so easily and readily available that people can just build the game themselves. And that's not usually the case nowadays. But it has happened in the past where the companies have been sunk because literally their secret sauce has been revealed. Like, and there's nothing they can do to get it back at that point. And that's why I always stress, like, your security is paramount, like in protecting and, preventing any kind of, like foul play. And this goes with internal threats, like, like you've got an employee that's disgruntled and they want to leave and with a bang, or they want to leave and like, take stuff with them. There's security solutions in place for that, that you can employ.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, well, that kind of leads me to, we'll kind of finish off on that thought. What would you tell a company to say, hey, you've got to improve your security posture? You've got to do these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things, whether it be pen testing or whatever. What would you recommend to the folks out there that think and say, hey, I got to improve my security posture? What do you tell them?
So, like you said before, cybersecurity is such a wide spectrum, and if you ask one security guy to another security guy, you will get different answers on that, and that's a good thing. I like that. I am way more into the attack side things. I really like the red teaming side. That's where my heart's at. But at Prescriptive, I do a lot more blue team stuff, and it's kind of a mix between the two because you have to understand, like kind of we talked about, like being a hacker and seeing how a hacker works and how a hacker operates really gives you insight on what you really need to protect. Not just
Right.
You think you've got things in place, but then they find a way around it. That's where the pen testing is really important. And so I always stress that, like, at least an annual pen test, like,
Right.
start with to really understand where you stand, where it's like really understand what's missing, what's like where the gaps really are. Because a decent pen tester, like, and I'm not saying I'm a decent pen tester either. I mean, there's lots of guys out there, but I mean, it's the thing is like if I can get into your network, that means that there's somebody out there that's way better than I am that can too. And so, like, that's the way to perceive, like, okay, well, first off, where are the holes? And then vulnerability management. Absolutely, like scans, having internal scans that you can run monthly, quarterly, something that will be a consistent perspective on what your network looks like internally and externally. Those are the two things that I always tell people, like I would always recommend if you really want to beef up your security posture, because it really just at least points out where you need to fill in gaps. There's so many different platforms now that, and there's different ways to access a network, especially like post-COVID. There's a lot of remote access tools that we use, not just VPN anymore. There's SASE, there's a lot of like cloud-based, like there's token-based, there's all kinds of different ways that you can get into your work network and your work platform, or maybe like a work PC that's like a virtual machine that you can VDI or whatever into. That needs protection. Like those are just more things that they are protecting tools, but they themselves can be used as vectors. It can be used as ways to get into a network. And so I always remind people that, anything that you're doing that's showing to the public is something that can be an attack vector from someone on the outside. And then internally, just knowing what's going on. Like I think a lot of people spend more time on, I like to equate it to building castle walls and having no idea what's inside their castle. Like they'll build this really epic perimeter that really protects against all these different things, and they've got their policy set up in such a great way to protect against outside threats, and they never think about what happens when something does get in. Because at that point, you're like, where's your visibility? So visibility is also crucial. So backing it up, like pen testing and vulnerability management and scanning are like essential to know, like where to what your perimeter looks like, knowing, and also to know what you're doing internally to protect yourself against all these different things and find the gaps, and then some sort of visibility on the inside, especially like outside too, but especially just having logs, having something that you can go back and see. Well, this person accessed that at this time. Those are the most essential things in a security stack that I think that need to happen. Obviously, there's things that I'm not saying because it's more they're implied firewalls.
All the standard blocking and tackling type things.
Exactly. Yeah, those are the things that they should be understood. But when it
that's
comes
a given. I would say like email security, firewalls, DLP. I mean, there's some basic stuff out there that everyone should have.
And you'd be surprised because I mean, like, well, you wouldn't, because like you and I know, like we work with different like companies, and like our companies, I feel do a decent job that our clients we work with, but there's plenty of people that we'll run into and we'll start talking to them and they're like, yeah, we don't know what we don't know. We don't have a clue what we're missing. Can you help us out? And then you find out, man, I don't know how you guys are not attacked yet. Like
that's why they need people like you out there, Nick.
And that's why that's why I love what I do, because I love helping. I love being supportive, but I also love to break things. So it's kind of a mix of the two things that I love to do the most in that. And so I get to, like do it all. So.
Well, great. I think we'll close on that kind of, with your advice on, what to do next. And Nick, I'll put I'll tag you in this when I publish it. But if someone wanted to get in touch with you, Nick, how would they do that?
You can email me at Prescriptive Solutions. It's in Whittington at prescriptive.solutions. No .com, because we're cool like that. And you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. So yeah, and then I would say smoke signals, but I'm not always privy to know who's using smoke at the same time. So.
All right. Well, we'll end on that, Nick. Nick, again, thanks for being on the show. Enjoyed it. I hopefully, and I think the people enjoy it because this is such a big topic, and I think you shed some light in a lot of different areas. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Paul.
Oh, you're welcome. And that's another wrap for Business Brains and the Bottom Line. Signing off. My name is Paul Delegro. Until next time.